Hey guys, it's Adam from Premium Poker Tools, and today I'm going to give you an overview of this page. So the point of this page is to help you decide whether or not to call. And to explain how this works, I'm going to go over a sample hand. So let's say that we have Jack of Spades, Ten of Spades in the big blinds. Our opponent opens to 3 big blinds for middle position, and we call and go heads up to the flop. Then the flop comes Jack of Hearts, 4 diamonds, 3 diamonds. We have top pair with the weak kicker. We check, they bet half pot, and we call. Then the turn comes a King of Spades, and we check, they bet full pot, and we're faced with a decision here. So we can use this tool to help us figure out whether or not we should call. So to use the tool, we kind of go through things step by step. So step 1 asks us which street are we deciding whether or not to call on, and here we're deciding whether or not to call on the turn. Step 2 asks us how many opponents we're facing on that street. We're facing 1 because we're heads up. Step 3, what are our hole cards? So we have Jack of Spades, 10 of Spades. Step 4, what do we think our opponent's range is after the pre-flop action is finished, e.g. heading into the flop. So pre-flop, they open for middle position and we call. So this is basically asking us what do we think they're opening from middle position. So let's just kind of eyeball a range. I'm just going to do something like this. Let's add in some suited connected hands, blah, blah, blah. Let's say this is kind of the range that they're opening from middle position. A little bit, maybe a little wide, but let's say we're against a more aggressive player. So now we move on to step 5. What are the flop cards? So the flop comes Jack of Hearts, 4 diamonds, 3 diamonds. Okay, so now it asks us what do we think our opponent's range is after the flop action is finished, heading into the turn. So what this is really asking us is after they bet half pot on the flop, what do we think that their range is? So I'm going to expand this, and I'm going to show you how I would go about answering this. So the question really is, what do we think that they're betting the pot with half pot? And I'm going to say that we're against an aggressive opponent who's going to see bet pretty wide, especially on this board. And I'm going to say that they're going to play their pocket pairs under top pair, like for showdown value. So when they have pocket 9s, pocket 8s, they're going to check it back and try to get the showdown. I'm going to say that. Same with top pair, weak kicker. Let's just assume with these sorts of hands, they're going to check it back and try to get the showdown. With the stronger stuff, I'm going to assume that they're going to bet it for value. And this weaker stuff, I'm going to assume that they're going to be c-betting pretty wide with all of this stuff. So that's my assumption about what they're doing on the flop, what their range looks like after the flop. So now we're going to move on to step 7. The turn was, let's see, the King of Spades. So we're going to enter King of Spades. And then our opponent bet full pot. So it's step 8 is asking us what pot odds do we have facing the turn bet. So after a full pot bet, we have 2-to-1 pot odds. So let's just say the pot is 100, they bet $100 into it. Now the pot's 200 and we have to call 100. So we have 2-to-1. So after a full pot bet, we have 2-to-1 pot odds. I'm going to skip this section and come back to it because it's going to make more sense later. So we're going to move on to step 9. Step 9 is probably the most important step. So it's asking us, what do we think our opponent would bet the turn with? And more specifically, what do we think they'd bet full pot with on the turn? Because maybe we could read into the bet sizing to figure that out. So when they bet the turn for full pot, I'm gonna I'm gonna assume that with their jacks, they're gonna try to get the showdown. With their queens, they're gonna try to get the showdown. With any of their kings, like they bluff the flop, they catch a king. I'm gonna assume they're gonna want to bet that for value. Same with anything stronger, especially with the draws possible. And then I'm going to assume that any of the like worst stuff, I'm going to say gut shots and I don't know, any one overcard hands. I'm going to assume that this is an aggressive player who is going to barrel very frequently. So they're only really playing their showdown value hands as a check, and everything else they're kind of an aggressive guy who's going to barrel. So that's my assumptions about this opponent. And we can then move on to some kind of conclusions. So this is telling us that if we don't factor in the possibility of betting on future streets, calling the turn bet with 2-to-1 pot odds will be profitable. So that was very wordy, so let's kind of break that down and understand it. So if we were on the river, or if we were facing an all-in or something where there's no betting on future streets, with 2-to-1 pot odds, we would need 33.33% equity to break even. And I'll kind of go into that a little in a second. But that's kind of the math. We would need 33.3% with 2-to-1 pot odds. Now this is saying that we have about 55.7% equity versus this range right here. So we have a lot more equity than we would need to break even. So it's giving us this check mark and saying that that it will be profitable if we don't factor in future streets. However, that would be kind of unwise to not factor in future streets because we have to see a river. So this next section kind of goes into like once we factor in future streets, and it explains some concepts such as effective odds and implied odds, reverse implied odds, all of these things. So once we factor all of this in, we can say what our real odds are. And I'm going to say that our real odds are maybe, let's say, 1.5 to 1. Now it's going to say that with 1.5 to 1 real odds, we would need 40% equity to break even. And, we needed 33.3 before, now we need 40%, a little bit more. And this is telling us that even once we use the real odds, our call will still be profitable. If you're not familiar with these sorts of things, effective odds and implied odds and real odds and stuff, I'd really recommend checking out The Theory of Poker by David Sklansky. It's kind of I would say it's kind of like a required reading for poker players, particularly chapters 5, 6, and 7 for this tool. So I've got the book, a PDF of the book here. Chapter 5 is talking about pot odds, then effective odds, and implied and reverse implied odds. So these chapters will kind of help you understand the concepts that I'm talking about, where we have to factor in the future street. But yeah, so this section is telling you whether it's profitable once you factor in the future street, and this section is just a more preliminary conclusion about whether it's profitable based on the pot odds. So here we have the situation where we have second pair and we're facing a turn bet, a full pot turn bet, and it's saying that against this opponent, calling is going to be profitable. And, from here we can kind of go and tweak some of the assumptions we made, because we were assuming that our opponent is very aggressive and very bluff heavy. We assumed on the flop that they're, c-betting almost all the time, about 83% of the time, and we assumed that they have a value to bluff ratio of 82 to 18. Like they're bluffing 82% of the time, about 4 to 1 value to bluff ratio. And then on the turn, we also assumed that they were pretty bluff heavy, that they're bluffing twice as many times as they're value betting about. So now we can go and tweak these assumptions, and we can say that maybe they're not betting their gut shots, and they're not betting all of their 1-over card hands. So we can say against this opponent who is more value heavy, now we can see how that changes things. So now against this opponent, our equity went down to about 34%. So this is saying that if we base it on the pot odds, calling would still be profitable. But now if we scroll down and we use this 40% break-even number based on the real odds, now we don't have enough equity. We have 34% and we need 40%. So now it's telling us that it's no longer profitable to call the turn. So you can see that it's very dependent on what we think their ranges are. So I think it's really important to go play around with different assumptions and see how that changes things. And by studying this, I think it'll make you a much stronger poker player. You kind of get a feel for different situations and how you perform against different ranges. But instead of clicking around, I built this kind of tool here to make that easier on you. So when you click simulate, I'll show you what happens. It's a little bit tricky, but bear with me. So what this is saying is that, so this column right here is like their value range. So this right here is saying if they bet top pair, top kicker, and better for value, and they're only value betting, that we have like 34.3% less equity than we need. So like, we need 40% equity, but we have 33% less than the 40. So we only have 7%. That's kind of what this is saying here. So by saying they're only value betting top pair, top kicker, and better, it's like saying they're not value betting top pair with a good kicker. They're not value betting top pair with a weak kicker. Now let's move on to one of these columns. So like, let's say top pair, top kicker, and 2 to 1. So 2 to 1 is saying that their value to bluff ratio is 2 to 1. So, it's saying they're value betting top pair, top kicker, and better, and they're bluffing with half as many combos as they're value betting. So like if this equates to, 50 combos, they're going to value bet with their 50 combos over here, and they're going to bluff with 25 more combos. So with these assumptions, we still don't have enough equity to call. We have 28% when we need 40%. So this is saying that we're 12% less than what we need. But if we move all the way over here to the 1 to 2 column, now this is saying that the value to bluff ratio is 1 to 2. So when they have twice as many bluffs as they do value bets, we have 15% more equity than we need. So like we have 55%, we need 40%. So this is green now, showing that a call would be profitable. So hopefully that made sense. This right here is showing the value to bluff ratio, and this is saying their value, like what are they value betting with. So kind of the intersection of these two things is like, how close are you to the required equity. So the idea behind this is to give you, at a glance, like how you perform against different ranges. So we can see like it's very dependent on the value to bluff ratio. Like when their value to bluff ratio is 2 to 1, even if they're value betting very thinly, like we still can't really call because this is all red. If it's 3-1, we really can't call. But once it starts to get to like a 1-to-1 value to bluff ratio, we can see that like, okay, now it depends on how thinly they value bet. Like, if they're only value betting their overpairs and better, then we can't really call. But like once they start to value bet top pair with like a weaker kicker, now we can call. If they start to value bet like, pocket pair under top pair or their second pair like a jack, now it starts to become profitable. So that's kind of how you can interpret this table. And we can see that if they're bluffing twice as much as they're value betting in this column, it doesn't matter how thinly they value bet. Like now, if they're bluffing this frequently, now we can always call. So yeah, the idea behind this table is to help you zoom out and see how you perform against different ranges. So rather than clicking around with this and seeing, different, by setting different ranges this way and then scrolling around, this kind of helps you zoom out. So we've kind of walked through the majority of this tool. Again, the idea is to, you take a hand and you follow the steps and you plug in kind of the answers and the ranges that you put them on. And this tool is going to tell you whether you have enough equity to justify calling. And I want to emphasize that I think it's important to really tweak the assumptions that you make and see what happens if they're, betting with one overcard, what happens when they're not betting with one overcard or gut shots. Like, really play around with the assumptions to get a feel for how you perform in different situations. Check out this table and really try to understand it. I have this help section here to help you out. But yeah, this tool should be useful to help you figure out if you have enough equity to justify calling. And finally, to wrap things up, I'd like to show you that I have this shareable URL feature. So if you want to post a hand to a poker forum or study with friends, you click this and it gives you a URL. And you can send this to a friend or post it in a poker forum, and they're going to end up seeing exactly what you see. I'm just doing this because I don't have internet right now. But yeah, when your friend clicks the link, they're going to see exactly the same page that you see. And they can see the assumptions that you made, the output that you get, and they can even play around with their own assumptions. So they can say, pre-flop, I think they're opening even wider. I think this opponent you were against was like, very aggressive, and you can see that like once you change this range, it's gonna change everything else. So when you send it to a friend, they can like put in their own assumptions and they can see how that changes things. So this link, this shareable URL, it's a good way to study with friends. So hopefully that made sense. If it didn't, you can email me at azerner3@gmail.com. I'd love to hear what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, like what feature ideas you have, anything I could do to improve the tool. Just let me know. But yeah, hopefully this video was okay, and hopefully you enjoyed the tool. And thank you guys for watching.